What's up, guys? Alright, here's the next video in the Great Crosman Build series. We are doing trigger mods. Alright, so starting out, we're going to need our Dremel tool. And this is our cutting tool on there. We have a steel wire buffing wheel. And we have a multi-sided nail buffing wedge just for fingernails. You can get this at Walmart. What I like about using this is it's got really fine sandpaper and buffing material on it, so you can get that really shiny metal surface. You're not going to be taking off a lot of metal by doing it. So you can use sandpaper. I'm not going to recommend that when you can use something that simple. We have our 22 cal shell casing. This has already been buffed out, as you can see, so that's nice and shiny. That's good to go. We'll probably do a little polishing on our hammer. And then we've got three basic components in our trigger mechanism. We've got the trigger itself, our sear, and then our sear spring. And these are all just attached by pins. They come right out. And there's a shim right there with our pin. We'll leave that. Take our hammer spring out. And we can set the handle aside for a while because we're not going to need that right now. Alright, the first thing I want to do is the Nirvana mod. And basically we're just taking off this extra part here that sticks out. So it'll be just like this. You don't need that. I'm not sure why it's there. I guess Crosman feels like it helps to kind of hold your finger in there. But we're going to be putting a trigger shoe on here. We don't need that part, so we can take that off. I probably want to just hold this with pliers because it can get a little hot. And I am wearing safety glasses. Definitely want to wear safety glasses for all the mods that you do. Okay, not much to that. Wow, that is extremely hot. Another thing you want to be careful about is the friction heat when using these power tools. So, see how it looks a lot better? It looks like a real trigger. We don't have this extra part sticking off for no reason. That's all we'll need to do for that. Let's go ahead and work on the sear right now. Now this stuff will have gunk and grime on it. Comes with rust on it apparently, not sure why. And let's look up close. You'll see kind of a seam running down the middle. Some rough edges. You don't really need all of that. Or you don't want it because it creates friction. You want everything smooth and polished and shiny. So anywhere where that's contacting other metal pieces, we want to polish that down. I'm actually going to, I'll use a sanding bit real quick. Swap that out on the Dremel tool here. And we'll just hit that real quick with the sander. Okay, won't take a hole out of that. Doesn't need it. Then we are going to take our number 1, which is the highest grit, or the coarsest grit on here. We don't have to do every part of it, just the parts on the end that are going to make contact. Now hopefully you can see this. You'll see where it looks smooth and then kind of pocks and dark marks in there. Oh, that's the wrong one. We're doing yellow. So this part's kind of tedious. That's basically what we're going to do. So I want to go through all that and just buff that out. We'll progressively go towards the smoother and shinier surface until we've got that all shined up and real smooth. And that's what we'll do to our sear. As far as this surface rust and stuff, that doesn't really matter, but we'll probably polish that out anyways. Okay, the next thing, we've done our Nirvana mod on the trigger. We're going to be finishing up our polishing of the and smoothing of the sear. I want to go with our spring here. So you can see that it's bent. Now it's the same either side, so it doesn't really matter which side you do this on. But what we need to do here is cut off usually about a coil. Okay, so it's going to be somewhere right around here. It does overlap at the top, so you got to take that into account. We'll just take our needle nose. Oh, these are my bad ones. Well, we'll just go back to our Dremel tool for that. You can normally use needle nose. These ones are dull. Going right about there. A lot of sparks and a lot of smoke on that. So clipping it would be much easier. It's going to leave a nasty sharp point on that, which you're going to want to dull with your pliers. Now, our 22 shell casing is not meant to go in here, so we have to make it fit. Which means we're going to have to open that spring up a little bit. And we're going to have to just finagle that. Until that casing slides in. You may have to be creative with your tools here, guys. I actually kind of need two tools, or two sets of pliers to get that undone. Let's see what if we can improvise. We're basically just trying to widen that out to allow our shell casing to slide right in there. And it's going. It didn't want to go. That's how it'll fit in there. Now actually, before we push that down too far, I'm gonna check to make sure everything's fitting right. So that sear is going to have to be flush, basically, with the frame. I think we're getting pretty close on that, to be honest. Getting pretty close on it. We will work on that a little later. That's basically, we're pretty close as is. You got to be careful because if you put it down there too far, then it's not going to be long enough, and then you'll have to stretch your spring out. So there's a fine line there for perfect fit. That's basically what it'll look like. You'll just have your casing wedged down in that spring. And kind of related to the sear will be the hammer. And remember, our pin faces upwards up top, because that connects with the bolt when you pull it back. So that'll face upwards. Our sear is on the bottom, and it basically does something like this. So you pull it back, catches, and then when you pull the trigger, it pushes this down, this slides off, goes forward. So right down here there's a catch spot where the sear engages the hammer. So the way that you can do it is to line up 180 degrees opposite of that hole. So if the hole's there, there's the bottom. Switch out our Dremel, we'll go to our steel wire here. So I can see it, whereas you may not be able to in the video, but I can see where the bottom is, so it's all up along in here. Now this particular mod, it's not doing a whole lot because this is pretty smooth anyways. You do want to be careful because if you over sand or polish or remove too much material, the pieces aren't going to engage, because they are supposed to connect with each other and lock into place. You make them too smooth, they won't lock, and it'll basically disengage on its own. And while that does help to give it a hair trigger, it can be too hair and it can just go off on its own. Now, generally it won't actually fire on its own, but it'll basically uncock itself on its own. So could potentially be dangerous, but it's usually just more of a hassle and aggravation if you do it wrong. So be careful with that. I'll probably go through and buff it a little bit the same way with the sear. All of this will have to be fine-tuned. But basically when you put it back in, you're going to put your spring on and your sear, and then you can put in your safety and everything else. There's also some shims you can add. I may or may not. A lot of people are concerned about the side to side, the wiggle action if you don't have the shims, but generally I found that to be negligible, but you can. Just a little piece of metal put in there. Really anything that acts as kind of a washer would work. A little piece of plastic would even work too. So we'll see how that turns out. We'll probably revisit this in the assembly portion, or maybe when we actually make the trigger shoe, which I'm going to hold off on making that for now. And then we'll just come back to putting the trigger and all the components back together. But I wanted you to see these mods as far as what needs to be polished, what needs to be cut, how to modify the spring with the shell casing, and putting all that back together. Sorry, I probably should have had it this way the whole time. So you can take a look at it. And when we pull on our trigger, it backwards motion pushes the sear up on that end, pushes it down on this end, which presses down on the shell casings and spring. And all that's doing is giving you upward pressure for the sear to engage the hammer up here. So when it's pushed up and there's no pressure, the hammer is locked back. Push it down, there's a spring behind this hammer wanting to push it forward, so when it goes down, the hammer slides off and goes bam right into the valve stem, which releases all the air. Pull it and then it goes forward. So the name of this game